Mr. Roach, welcome. Please tell us what you're running for and some of your background.
Well, thank you, and thank you for inviting me. My name is James Roach. I go by Jim locally. I'm running for the 14th Congressional District seat here in the Southwest Florida, which is all of Lee County, most of Collier, and a little bit of Charlotte County. My background is quite varied and actually prepares me quite well to represent this area. I started years ago with General Motors. I worked in the service training area and then moved into the research area, worked on the Saturn car project. And while I was at General Motors, one of the things I did quite a bit was work with the colleges and local dealerships and local factories, working on getting trained workforces into our plants and into our dealerships. So it was a very good experience for me to create jobs and create a workforce that matches the jobs out there. It turns out that's a good thing to know how to do in Southwest Florida. I also did a little bit of time in the energy industry as an auxiliary nuclear reactor operator for Carolina Power and Light. So I understand a little bit about our energy needs and our network of power lines across the country and how that needs to be updated. Then when I moved to Florida, I started a small company that I still have running in Cape Coral, which is where I live. And I've actually created jobs in Cape Coral. We had about 12 people maximum working on some military contracts. I worked with the Pentagon, the British Navy, the Canadian government. So I'm familiar with how our country spends money. And I'm also familiar with how to create jobs in a small industry. Because when you work at General Motors, you sometimes, in a large corporation, don't understand the needs of small business. Locally, I'm a director of my Chamber of Commerce on Pine Island, which is next to Cape Coral. I'm also a vice president of a community service group called the Matlacha Mariners. And those two organizations really have allowed me to work on the Chamber of Commerce side, work with a variety of small businesses to see their needs, get an understanding of how the ups and downs, the impact of the oil spill, the impact of our economy in general on a variety of businesses and a number of people that are no longer working. Then on the community service organization, I also belong to Kiwanis, but I've had a very personal look at the needs of a lot of people that are out of work or losing their homes. So I'm very connected business-wise and citizen-wise to the community. And aside from that, my wife, who is the reason I'm actually doing as well as I am in the campaign, supports me 100%. And she's been a kindergarten teacher for 27 years in Lee County. And this is her last year before she retires. But she knows more people and is more respected and understands. We have very long conversations about our educational system. Her viewpoint from the K-12 system, my viewpoint from when I taught at a community college and I was very involved in the General Motors training. So we're looking at our combined knowledge as doing some things to improve our education. But that's pretty much my background.
What's the name of your company? I'm sorry. What's the name of your company?
The company's name is TSI Strategies. And I have, well, two things happened. One, with the wars, the pots of money that I was using, being hired by from the Pentagon and the British Navy, pretty much dried up. It was more in the, somewhere between research and application. They have different segments of money. So the last few years, that's cut back quite a bit. So I put my company on hold entirely for this year while I run for Congress.
Have you run for elected office before, and if not, why this one?
No, I haven't. This is my first run. I've worked on the last 3 congressional campaigns in Southwest Florida. One in up in Sarasota, and then 2 in this district. And I got a very good feel for the district, and the position I had working on these campaigns as a volunteer was more of actually, I shot some video and was more of the advisor and coach of the candidate. So
Mr. Neild?
I worked with Mr. Neild and Jan Schneider up in Sarasota.
Okay.
Yes. But that got me interested in this, and then I realized I had the timing right for my business that wasn't going to take away from that, because the wars did that. And it just felt right to do that. I had the background, I had the interest, and I certainly had the desire.
What product did TSI Strategies produce or make? I mean, it's hard to imagine a defense contractor having a hard time during a war. Isn't that when they're buying stuff and spending money?
The product I had at TSI Strategies, I didn't actually produce a product. I was a consultant for training and technology. And I'd come up with a very interesting way to help the military fix their complex equipment based on some research work I did at General Motors. And in a nutshell, without getting too complicated on this, the people that write the manuals and the training traditionally organize them in thousands of pages, and they organize them by nouns. And the people that actually do the fixing do tasks or verbs. So I came up with a cross-reference so that the people working on things could tell them what verb, what action they wanted to do, and it would go through all the nouns and find the right pages so that they could do their work. It sounds simple, but it's
I
much
have
more
that trouble
complex.
with the book that comes with my car.
Yes.
That's a glove box. I mean.
Well, that was, and that system is still published in the GM service manuals today. It's an interesting bridge between nouns and verbs and workers and information.
So when you say you worked at GM in service training, you taught people how to provide service to GM products?
Yes, one of the things I did. When I first started working for General Motors, I started as an automotive electronics instructor. Then I taught for 7 or 8 years in the classrooms, in the factories, because they have to repair vehicles that when they're assembled and there's a part missing, they have to figure that out. But then I moved into instructional design, worked on the Saturn project, which then launched me into the service research area.
You helped develop the Saturn.
Yes.
An auxiliary nuclear reactor operator. And I'm not going to make any Simpsons jokes. But what
Thank
did,
you.
what does well, actually I guess I just did. But what did that entail?
It's sort of like the co-pilot for the reactor, where they have the primary reactor operator who has much more experience and been there longer and much more training. And then the auxiliary operators were the ones that could run it, but did a lot of work out in the plant, checking the settings. They would do the rounds. They would make sure that the readings inside the control room actually matched what was going on in the plant, so we didn't have any misconceptions go on. It was very fascinating work, and I learned a lot about how we use power in this country and how we produce it. So that was my job for about 3 years.
It sounds pretty stressful.
Oddly enough, it wasn't. It's such it's a good industry to compare to maybe oil drilling. It is so regulated, and the regulators are so much a part of the factories or the plants that you worked with the NRC. They knew what you were doing. Everything was laid out clearly. There were very, very few times that anything was stressful because they'd planned on everything.
Is nuclear power safe?
Yes.
Do we need more of it?
Yes.
Does the federal government have a role to play in that?
Certainly. And if we get into an energy discussion, there certainly are some issues with nuclear power that people are concerned about. If you ever had a plant do something like Chernobyl, which was an entirely different type of nuclear plant, we don't have a plant that could do that here, which, by the way, we haven't had any deaths in nuclear power plants, commercial plants in this country, ever. Compared to, 15 or 20 people that die in coal mining accidents. So from that perspective, it's certainly much safer. And I think with the current crop of nuclear reactors, we could offset a lot of our oil and coal usage. Because if you look at, we import about $1 billion a day worth of oil, and the new reactors only cost about $1 billion to build. So certainly there's a role for the federal government to encourage more nuclear reactors because it lessens our dependence on foreign oil and on coal mining, although that's certainly a good job place to have.
Most of our dependence on foreign oil is burned up in our automobiles. Any thoughts politically where you think we should go as far as future use of alternative fuels for automobiles?
Well, and that gets back to my varied background. I know a lot about vehicles. And right now in Michigan, there's a car driving around that has about a 200-mile range and all of the pep of a gasoline engine that has 0 emissions, that is not electric. It runs on hydrogen. And the company that built that, one of the drawbacks of hydrogen is if you store it at the 5,000 pounds per square inch PSI pressure, and you have a couple of those bottles in your car and you're in an accident, it can get exciting. The car that's driving around in Detroit is storing their hydrogen at 300 PSI, not 5,000. It's an offshoot of the battery technology. The lithium-ion batteries, the powder actually absorbs hydrogen and stores it at low pressure. And then they have a process that gets it back out to burn in the vehicle. Those are things that we could easily do. It's a long-term plan, but that's one of the things that we're trying to do is generate a long-term energy plan.
Should government be involved in that plan, or should that be something that the free marketplace will handle in time?
I think there's a tie-in for both. I think that the government can support starting things out on a limited basis or doing things like in Florida. If you have a vehicle that does not use gasoline and you go to register it and get your license plates, they charge you a fee roughly equivalent to what you would have paid in gasoline tax. So things like that go a long way to discourage people from switching to alternative fuels, and we need to find them, and they're somewhat hidden, but you have to find things like that and begin taking them away because we want to encourage it. So, yes, there's always some government involvement, but not on the production, not on the ownership end, just to get it started. We've always done good at that in our country, of getting things started with a collaborative effort, but then we need to let it get out there in the free market.
Jim, would you tell us about your medal?
Yes, I'd be happy to. I'm proud of that. I'm a Vietnam veteran, combat decorated. This is the Bronze Star from the Army. And as a side note, back in December when I first put my website up, before any of the discussions about people claiming to be veterans or not, I was talking with my wife and said, why don't I just take my discharge paper and white out my Social Security number and personal information and put it on the website. So since December, that's been out there, because while I'm proud of being a veteran, I know there's an issue of people that sometimes exaggerate. And this is certainly just the one nicer looking medal that I have. It's not the only one, but I'm very proud to have served our country, and I believe, actually it's a very interesting comment that I haven't felt as patriotic and as connected to our country since I was in the military, but now that I'm running for office and out talking with thousands of people and citizens about our country and what we need to do to fix it and make it better, it's the same feeling. It's amazing. I'm just thrilled to be doing that.
What are you hearing when you're out and talking to them?
Well, it's not uncommon from what you hear on the radio. It's jobs, Southwest Florida jobs. How do we get out of our foreclosure upside down system of property values versus what our mortgages are? And then overlying that is an anger and frustration with our system of government. And it's not one party or the other, which, by the way, I am a Democrat. I should mention that. But I've been able to ask enough questions and I literally, since last December, I've met over 100,000 people in this district. My wife and I go out every day. We're at every parade, every event, in the hot sun, and I love doing that. It's what you should do if you want to represent people. You should meet them. But the frustration they have isn't with one party or the other as much as it is this fear, frustration, and observation of a disconnect between the voters and what what they feel that they want their government to do and their representatives, and what actually happens if you watch C-SPAN or if you watch CNN or Fox News. There's a growing disconnect, at least that's the feedback I get from the voters, that they're not listening. They're not talking about those issues back in their districts. And it doesn't seem to be one party or the other. I have an incredible amount of support from independents and Republicans because I sit and talk. And the problems don't have those labels on them. Jobs are things that we need. And it doesn't matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat. It matters if you know how to bring jobs here. Which, by the way, I brought it. I like props. So
What do you got?
I have some interesting material. This flexible
Yep.
material comes on big rolls. It's roofing. You roll it out, you can put it on your home or your business roof, and then you hook the wires up and it's a solar panel.
Really?
It makes electricity. It's built in the United States, not in this state. But I've been talking with the company that builds these, and we're the Sunshine State. You'd think they should build it here. And it's a wonderful high-tech job building this, but it's also a wonderful construction job putting it on the roofs. Those are the types of industries that we need to bring to Southwest Florida.
What role does Congress play in doing that?
Again, it's starting things up. We have, this particular company makes lots of this now. They export 80% of it to Europe. Now, we, of all countries, need to have alternative energies, but we need to get them started. We need to work with the local and state governments to make sure that our power companies don't make it difficult for us to hook alternative energies up to sell that energy back. So there's things that our government can do to help get it started, but they're doing fine on their own. We just need to start buying it and bring them down here and have them build it here.
Are you familiar with the energy bill that is pending in Congress and everybody thinks will be passed before the end of the year?
I'm somewhat familiar with that. I've been sidetracked on immigration and jobs recently.
We'll get to that,
Yes.
the immigration.
Yes, we do need a long-term energy policy. We use more energy per capita than anybody else, and we buy it, which means we're sending our dollars outside of our country for a lot of the resources to make that energy. We need a bill to do that. I don't know enough details about the current energy bill because, like I said, I've been working on a lot of other issues, but I know the cap and trade part of it it's certainly not an easy thing to put on top of everything we're doing now. I know raising our energy cost right now when we're struggling is going to be a difficult sell, and rightly so. It doesn't help businesses when you raise their costs.
This bill, before the big spill back in the spring, the Obama administration kind of, in a way to compromise for this bill, eased offshore oil, or proposed an easing of offshore oil restricted areas. Some on the east coast of Florida, some in the Gulf. Do you have a thought on that? Are you aware of where that is in the system? Your position on offshore drilling?
Well, certainly after the oil spill, everybody now is
right.
waving the banner of no, we don't like offshore drilling. So you have to be honest about that. As a resource for our country and an income source, if we had, and it gets me back to when I worked in the nuclear industry, it's safe because people were terrified of nuclear power and we made sure it was safe. Drilling, we weren't terrified of that, so we didn't regulate it and make sure it was as safe. But I think it's a resource that we can tap in the farther than 3 miles offshore, potentially, if it's safely done, as just a product. But I think our bigger problem is we don't have a plan to reduce our oil consumption. And what little we drill offshore certainly isn't going to change our gasoline prices. It's not going to change the $1 billion we send overseas for oil every day. But I don't think it's as, I don't think everybody that's saying no, we shouldn't drill offshore ever again, well, except for within the 3 miles, I don't think we ever should, because we're a tourist industry. But I think there's a lot of people going on the emotion of the recent spill to say we should never, ever drill 20 miles offshore. And at some point, those same people are going to come back and say, well, maybe if it's safe, or maybe if gasoline's $12 a gallon. So I'd rather be honest now and just say,
Right.
we're probably going to figure out a way to extract that safely.
One of your campaign slogans is "In town, in touch." What does that mean?
That was a nicer way of saying my wife can vote for me. Well, it's no secret that I'm running against Connie Mack, and he has a reputation for being not in our district so much. And of course, with his wife's campaign now being a contested race out in Palm Springs, California, we may see him even less. But that was because I am in town and I live here and certainly have a business here and chamber and all of the things that I am in town and in touch. So but thank you for asking that. I like to say that.
How long have you lived in Southwest Florida?
I've lived here 11 years now.
Okay.
My wife has lived here
Your
35 years.
your business is in Cape Coral, but you live on Pine Island, or?
No, my wife and I both live in Cape Coral,
Okay.
near Pine Island. It's
Okay.
a 10-minute drive,
Right.
and it's technically sort of Cape Coral anyway.
Yeah, right, it's on.
Pine Island is where Don Armstrong was from, right?
Yes.
How did he do it?
Donnie, actually, my wife taught his children, so, and my.
Is that how he did it?
Well, no. Well, it could be. Anything she's near does well. Look at me. Don Armstrong came out very strong for the busing issues we have up there and all the time and the hours that children have to spend on busing, and he has children in that system. And him and his wife and his children showed up at every forum that I was attending. And by the way, I did too, even though it wasn't my race. So I learned a lot about school board and the judges and the county commissioner races. And Don put a lot of effort in. And that, coupled with some of the anti-incumbent that school boards seem to inherit every election, that was my interpretation of how he did that.
Wow.
You said you learned a lot about immigration reform because it's been such an issue while you're campaigning. What do you think people feel, and what do you feel?
Well, there's a lot of people upset. My wife and I are always out. Mangomania for 2 days. We met 10,000 people. We had a booth. We stood in front of the booth talking to people for 8 hours a day for 2 days. And we've done that for 10 months at everything we could get. So we get raw comments. We don't talk to people that we assume will just like me. We don't know who they are. And there's a lot of people angry at the undocumented workers or illegal aliens or whatever topic they have.
Probably angry at Connie Mack, too.
They're certainly angry at his stance on the Arizona law. And what I've done so that I could have a rational conversation, because when I'm elected, I want to fix it. I don't want to use it as a political football. I don't want to be on the news with it. So I've come up with a discussion topic and a visualization where our immigration problem is more like having a home with 5 or 6 holes in the roof, and it's raining and there's water on the floor, and most of the undocumented workers are like running around saying, look at all the water on the floor, we got to clean it up, we got to clean it up, but nobody's looking on the roof to fix it. And so if we look at our immigration problem, we have borders that are not secure. We certainly need to do that to keep people that are not here legally out, but also the drugs, the terrorists. We need stronger borders. We need to look at the containers coming in at the ports and do a better job of that. But on top of that, we need to also look at some of the other holes in our immigration, like the guest worker program, where we bring workers in legally, but then our system in Immokalee, where I've been visiting, tends to make guest workers become illegal because they're not allowed to work on neighboring farms. So we have a law that encourages that. And certainly we need to increase the penalties for our own citizens that are paying people to come here illegally. And that's universally, everybody agrees with that. Whether you have the e-card and enforce that better, there's companies, Immokalee, your local lawn care service, that are making money off of paying people $2 an hour and making them live in conditions that we wouldn't put our pets in. And we do that. It's our own citizens. So that should be a felony. That shouldn't be a slap on the wrist and don't do it again. And that's actually one of the things Arizona law did, was make a tougher penalty for the employers.
But overall, the Arizona law is like mopping up the water.
It's, everybody's looking at the people. And if you solve the problems, if you realize that we pay 5 cents less a pound for tomatoes than we should because somebody's over in Immokalee working for $2 an hour, then you have to realize that when we pay 5 cents more for tomatoes, our free trade agreement then will put our tomato growers out of business, because now we'll buy Mexican tomatoes. So we have to, if you're going to fix the immigration problem, then you got to get ready to fix and put some protection in for our farmers so that you don't put them out of business.
Just to be clear, you wouldn't favor an Arizona type law?
Not from the stopping people on the street, potential profiling, loading up the local law enforcement with that job, where we should, when we start enforcing better, when we have the laws to do that, we need federal and local to work together, because I know in Cape Coral or Lee County, the more we put on our local sheriff department that we don't fund them for, the less other crime work. So that section of it is very much like looking at the water on the floor. I'd rather fix the problem so we don't have the leaks. And that goes very well with the thousands of people I've talked to, because they're so used to just seeing the rhetoric.
But
in
it
the
sounds
news.
like you're very similar to the position of your Republican opponent, Connie Mack.
Yes.
Okay.
He may have
And
read
it's got
that.
1,000 people angry out there, so thousands. of
Well,
people angry.
And I went to his forum a couple of weeks
Right.
ago, and he only talks about the workers that are here. And he doesn't talk about
Patching the
fixing
roof.
the problem. So the position of, no, I don't think the enforcement side of the Arizona law will work, because you're not stopping the flow in, you're not fixing the other problems, and you're not doing it collaboratively. The good thing about the Arizona law is it put a lot of pressure on Congress to do something, because they've been ignoring it for a long time. And that part of the law I like. It got everybody's attention, because we needed to fix it years ago.
We're running, we're getting very close to the end here, and you certainly have your campaign well thought out. What are we forgetting to ask you? What topic do you really want to tell us about that's important, that we may not have asked about?
Oh, well, actually, it's been a very good conversation. If I have a comment at all, it's by being out there for 10 months, talking to people, asking people what they want, and being a veteran, going into the VFW halls. I go into many more independent and stronger Republican areas than most people that would be campaigning, because I want to find out what people know. And there are two distinct opinions, depending on whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or an independent, like three. And I've done a very good job, I believe, of talking with everybody and finding out how we can come up with solutions for jobs, for our mortgage crisis, keeping our waters clean. One of the things you didn't ask about was the partisan fighting or bickering, which the voters are more than fed up with.
In Washington?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And in our area, we have, I believe there's 4 congressional districts that share the same sheet flow of water from Orlando down.
Mm-hmm.
And those 4 congressmen are not all in one party. And one of the things I would do immediately is start working together with them across the aisle. And as you probably figured out by now, my nature is to focus on the problem, not on the rhetoric. And that's certainly what goes a long way to solve some of the partisan fighting. And I think with this coming election and what we've seen already in some of the school board elections and county elections, maybe that message will come through from the voters that they need to not fight each other. They need to fight for our district. But that, the partisanship was one thing we didn't bring up, and that is something that I work very hard not to have. And I have a very strong contingent of independent and Republicans that think I should be their next congressman.
That'll have to be the last word. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thanks. I made
I
it.
saw your slogan on a bumper sticker,
Now,
and it's real short.